The hailstorm killed her last cow and her husband killed her spirit. A Lakota chief gave her calm. The day she came onto my land, I was mending the south fence alone, same as I'd done everything for the past 11 years. Alone. The post mall was slick with my own sweat, and I'd split 2 knuckles open on the wire and was sucking the blood off my hand when I heard the horse. Not the sound of a horse being ridden, the sound of a horse being led. Slow, step and drag, step and drag. I turned around. She was maybe 40 yards off, coming out of the tree break that runs along the creek, and she had a bay mare on a rope, and the mare was limping bad on the right foreleg, and the woman was limping almost as bad on her left. She had a rifle across her back, barrel down, and a canvas bag over one shoulder that looked near empty. She was wearing a man's coat, too big for her, the kind of coat a man doesn't give away unless he's dead or he threw her out, and she was soaked to the collar from the creek crossing. She didn't call out. She didn't stop when she saw me. She just kept walking, step and drag, the same pace she'd been moving, like she'd decided a long time ago that stopping was the more dangerous thing. My name is Running Elk. I was chief of the Oglala band that wintered in the Powder River Breaks, what white men call the High Plains country just east of the Bighorns. By the year this happened, I had been a chief for 19 winters, which meant I had spent 19 winters settling other men's quarrels and carrying other men's grief and holding the band together through the kind of seasons that make men want to stop holding anything together at all. I was 52 years old. I had buried a wife and a son. I had signed 2 treaties I knew the government would break before the ink was cold, because the alternative was watching my people starve. And sometimes you sign the thing you know is a lie because the lie buys your children 1 more year. I was not, by that point in my life, a man who frightened easily, but I was a man who was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. My band was camped 3 miles north. I had come down here by myself because I wanted an hour without anyone needing anything from me. Just the fence work and the quiet and my own thoughts, which were not good thoughts but were at least my own. And then she came out of the trees. She stopped maybe 20 feet away. Up close I could see she was younger than I'd first taken her for, maybe 35, maybe a little less, but her eyes were older than that. Gray eyes, the particular kind of gray that isn't soft, the kind that's been rained on so many times it went the color of the clouds themselves. She looked at me a moment, she looked at the fence, she looked back at me. She said, "Your fence or somebody else's?" I told her mine. She said, "Then I'd like to ask permission to cross it. My horse needs rest, and I don't know this country." I said, "Where are you going?" She thought about that. She said, "East. I think I was going east." That was the whole of it. I think I was, not I am going, past tense already, like east had been a plan she'd made in another life. I asked her where she'd come from. She said the Kendrick place, out past Salt Lick Creek, or what's left of it. I knew the Kendrick place. A small ranch, badly sited, sitting right in the path of every hard weather system that came rolling down out of Canada. I'd ridden past it 2 summers before and thought then that whoever was trying to run cattle on that ground was either brave or hadn't been told the truth about what winters did out there. I asked about the hail. She looked at me a little differently then. She said, "You heard about it." I said I'd seen the damage from the ridge 3 days ago. I'd seen the field. I'd seen the dead cow, or what I'd taken for one. She said, 3 cows, last 3. And then she just stood there a moment with the mare's rope in her hand and said nothing else, and the mare turned her head and nuzzled the woman's shoulder like it was a habit, like she did it all the time, and the woman reached up and put her hand flat on the mare's nose without looking at her. Automatic. The gesture of a woman who'd been being nuzzled by that horse for years. I said, "Your husband." It wasn't a question, the way I said it. Something in the set of her jaw when she'd said where she'd come from. The Kendrick place. Not my place, not home, the Kendrick place. She said, "He's not dead if that's what you're asking. I'd have stayed if he was dead." I looked at her a long time. She looked back. Neither of us looked away. I said, "Come to the camp. We'll look at your horse's leg." She said, "I don't want charity." I said, "The horse needs a poultice. What she gets isn't charity, it's veterinary care. And the fact that you walked her here instead of riding her when she was lame tells me you know the difference." She thought about that. She said, "All right, but I'll work for whatever we eat." I said, "Fine." And I put the maul down against the fence post, and I took the mare's rope from her hand, and I led them north toward the camp. Her name was Clara. Clara Kendrick, though she told me she'd been born Clara Haynes, and she said it the way people say the name they were born with when the name they took on marriage turned out to be something they wished they could give back. She'd come out from Ohio 8 years ago with a man named Dolan Kendrick who'd had a map in his pocket and a plan in his head, and a confidence about him that she'd mistaken, she said, for competence. He'd picked the Salt Lick Creek ground off a land office poster. He'd never wintered in the plains. He'd never ranched anything more demanding than his father's 40 acres of Indiana bottomland. She'd learned all of this after the first winter, when the confidence started to crack, and what was under it turned out to be something she hadn't been shown. She told me this piece by piece over several days, not in any order. A sentence here, a fragment there, while she was doing something with her hands, dressing the mare's leg, which was a bad sprain, not a break, which was luck. Splitting kindling at the edge of camp because she'd asked and I'd given her something to do. Sitting up late mending a piece of harness by firelight because she couldn't sleep and she needed her hands busy. I didn't ask her questions. I listened when she talked, and I let the silences sit when she didn't. And after a few days, I think she started to believe that I wasn't going to push her toward anything, and she relaxed a degree or two, the way a horse relaxes when it decides the new ground is safe. The band watched her with curiosity, mostly. A white woman at a Lakota camp was not, by the time I'm talking about, the unheard-of thing it might have been 20 years earlier. We'd had enough contact by then, traders, missionaries, the odd rancher who traded fairly, that her presence wasn't alarming to anyone. The women were hospitable. My sister walks far, who was blunt with everyone including me, told her on the second day that her hands were better than most white women's hands, which coming from Waxfar was approximately the warmest thing you were going to get. What I noticed in those first days was that Clara Kendrick startled at sudden sounds. Not the way a person startles at the unexpected, a door bang or a bird flushing from grass. The way a person startles who has learned to brace for the moment after a sudden sound, because the moment after has not always been safe. I noticed that she never sat with her back to an open space. I noticed that she ate carefully, slowly, like someone who wasn't sure there would be more. I noticed all of this and I said nothing about any of it, because there was nothing to say. She'd come out of a situation that had done something to her, and she was walking around in the aftermath, and the only thing that was going to help with that was time and quiet and nobody making her feel that she owed an explanation. What I didn't notice, right away, was what she was noticing about me. I'll tell you something about being a chief that nobody tells you before you become one. You spend so much time being what other people need you to be that you stop knowing, after a while, what you actually are when no one needs anything. You are the man who decides things. You are the man who holds the line in the council when the younger warriors want to ride against the soldiers, and you know the soldiers have rifles, and you know what the rifles will do, and you have to hold the line anyway. You are the man who sits with the grieving mother and the grieving father, and finds something to say that is true and is not cruel. You are the man who deals with the government agents who come with their papers and their promises that you know from experience are worth exactly the paper they're printed on, and you have to deal with them anyway, because the alternative is your people going hungry. You are the man who carries it. And in carrying it you forget, sometimes, that it is heavy. You forget you're tired because tired is just the condition. You forget that somewhere inside the chief, there is a plain man who is worn out and who hasn't been able to say so to a single living soul. My son, 2 Stones, had been killed in a skirmish with soldiers 2 winters before this. He'd been 23. He'd been the one person I could tell things to without putting on the chief's face first. The weight of things, the doubt of things, the places where I didn't know what the right decision was. He'd been good at listening, and he'd had a way of tilting his head to one side while he thought about what you'd said that was so much like his mother's way of doing the same thing that sometimes when he did it, I had to look somewhere else. After he died, I'd had no one to tell things to. I hadn't acknowledged that even to myself. I'd just gone on, chief first, everything else, if there was an everything else, a distant second. This is what Clara Kendrick saw. She saw it before I did, or before I admitted I did. It was the 5th night. She'd been sitting by the fire, mending something, and I'd come back from a long meeting in the council lodge, where we'd been arguing for the 3rd straight day about whether to move the winter camp north or stay on the Powder River ground. It was a disagreement that had real consequences on both sides and no clean answer, and I'd gotten the council to a place of uneasy agreement, which was the best you usually got, and I was tired in my bones, and I sat down by the fire without meaning to, and just sat there with my hands on my knees and looked at nothing. Clara didn't say anything for a while. She worked her needle through the leather she was mending. Then she said quietly, not looking up, "You don't have to be the chief right now. There's nobody here but me." I looked at her. She looked up from the leather then. She met my eyes and she said it again just the same, "There's nobody here but me." I don't know what she saw in my face. Whatever it was, she didn't look away from it. And I was so tired, and it had been 2 winters since my son died, and I had been the chief for 19 years, and nobody, not my sister, not the elders, not anyone, nobody had said that to me. Nobody had given me permission to put it down. I sat with it for a long minute. The fire popped. The camp was quiet, most of the band asleep by then, the dogs curled up. I said he was my son, 2 Stones. He died 2 winters ago in a fight that should never have happened, against men who should never have been on that ground, over a boundary that shouldn't have existed. She set down the leather. I said I was the one who decided we would winter where we wintered. I was the one who put us close enough to that ground for the fight to happen. She said you couldn't have known. I said I should have known. She said maybe, but you were trying to keep your people fed and you made a decision, and the decision had consequences you didn't intend. That's not the same thing as killing your son. I didn't say anything. She said, I know something about blame. I know what it feels like to carry something that isn't yours to carry and hold on to it anyway, because it's easier than putting it down and finding out what's left of you once you do. I looked at her. She said, Dallin hit me for the first time 6 months after we got to the Salt Lick Creek ground, when the first winter turned out worse than he'd planned and he needed somewhere to put the fear of it. And I spent 7 years after that telling myself it was because of the weather or the money or something I'd done or not done. Telling myself that if I was smarter or worked harder or said the right thing at the right time, it would stop. She looked at the fire. It didn't stop. The hail just finally made the decision for me. 3 dead cows, and he looked at me the way he looked at the dead cows, and I thought, all right, that's enough of that. She said it plain without looking for sympathy. Just the facts of it, the way you state a distance or a temperature. 3 dead cows, 7 years, that's enough of that. I said, you walked out with 1 lame horse and a near-empty bag. She said, yes. I said, and you'd been planning to go east. She said, I'd been planning to go somewhere that wasn't there. We sat with that a while. The fire burned down a little. The night was clear and cold, and the stars were thick in the way they get in that country, so thick that the sky isn't black anymore. It's more the color of dark water with light underneath. I said, my wife's name was Morning Light. She died of fever 12 years ago, and then my son. I paused. There was a time after 2 stones when I thought about just walking out onto the prairie and not coming back. I had never said that to anyone, not my sister, not the elders, no one. Clara said very quietly, but you didn't. I said I didn't. She said, why? I thought about it, I said, because there wasn't anyone else to do what I do, and I thought that was a good enough reason for a long time, being needed, being the one who does the thing. She said, and now? I said, now I don't know. Now I think maybe being needed is the loneliest thing there is, if nobody sees you doing it. She was quiet a moment, then she said, I see you doing it. Just that, 4 words. I looked at her. She wasn't saying it to be kind. She said it the way she'd said everything, flat, plain, like stating a fact she'd already verified. I see you doing it. I had to look away. I looked at the fire and I let it sit in me, those 4 words, and I let it be what it was, which was the first time in a long time that I was not carrying the weight alone in the dark. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, she had east, she'd always had east. She stayed because she chose to. The mare's leg healed in 12 days. On the 13th day she came to me while I was working on the council lodge's smoke flap, and she said the mare was sound and she could travel now. I said I knew. She said, I'd like to stay on for a while if that's agreeable. I said, what would you do? She said, work, whatever's needed. I'm good with horses and I can dress hides and I mend things that need mending. She paused. I'm not good at being idle. I said, I know. She said, all right then. And she turned around and went back to whatever she'd been doing. That was the entirety of it. No ceremony, no declaration. She stated what she wanted, I agreed, and she went back to work. It was, I thought, about the most honest conversation I'd had with another person in years. Over the weeks that followed, I watched her find her footing in the camp. She learned a handful of words in Lakota, and she was careful with them, using only what she was sure of and not pretending to know more than she did. She and Waxfar reached a kind of rough accord that I never fully understood, but that seemed to be founded on mutual respect for work done without complaint, which was Waxfar's highest measure of a person. She helped with the horses. She mended things. In the evenings, if the weather was clear, she'd sometimes sit outside the lodge and just look at the sky for a while, which I understood because I did the same thing. And she sat with me. Not every night, but most nights. After the day's work was done and the camp was settled, we'd sit by the fire and talk, or sit by the fire and not talk, which after a while became the same kind of companionship. She told me things about Ohio, the flat green country she'd grown up in, the way the light was different there, softer, more water in the air. I told her things about the country we were on, the way the Powder River looked in spring flood, the particular blue of the sky over the bighorns in late September. We told each other things carefully, the way you hand something fragile to someone you're learning to trust. I told her about 2 stones. Not all at once, over time. The way he'd learned to ride, fearless from the beginning, the kind of fearlessness that's not recklessness but ease, like the horse was a natural extension of him. The way he'd been in the council, younger than anyone else there, but nobody ever questioned his right to speak because what he said was always worth listening to. The argument we'd had 2 years before he died about whether to move camp. He'd wanted to go north. I'd overruled him. And then I told her that I hadn't been back to the place where he died, that I'd meant to and hadn't, that I was not sure I was ready and was not sure I ever would be, and that it was the one thing I had not done that felt still like something I owed him. She listened to all of it. She didn't tell me what I should do. She didn't offer consolation in the easy way, the way people do when they want the conversation to become more comfortable. She just listened, and when I was done she sat with it a moment and she said, "When you're ready, I'll go with you if you want company." I said, "You do that." She said yes. She said it the same way she'd said she could see me doing the work, not as a promise she was making, exactly, more like a thing she'd already decided. I said, it's not a comfortable ride. She said, I didn't figure it was. We went in early October, just the two of us. 2 days ride north and east into the broken country where the chalk bluffs come down to the river. We rode without much talk, which suited both of us. The country up there is open and you can see a long way in every direction. And in October the grass is gone to brown and gold, and the sky is a hard pale blue, and everything feels very clear and very still, like the land is taking a breath before winter. The place was a shallow coulee, south-facing, where a line of soldiers had caught a small group of hunters who'd ridden out from the main camp. 3 men, including 2 stones. The soldiers had outnumbered them, and they'd had better rifles, and it had been quick, which was what I'd been told, and I had tried to believe that was a mercy. I got down off my horse, and I stood in the coulee, and I looked at the ground, and I let it be what it was. Clara stayed on her horse at first, gave me the space. After a while she got down quietly and came to stand beside me, not touching, just present, close enough that I could hear her breathing. I stayed there a long time. The wind came through the coulee and smelled like coming snow. I had a thing I'd made, a small wrapped bundle of things 2 stones had valued. A stone he'd carried since boyhood that was the color of turquoise but heavier, and a piece of his horse's mane, and a prayer stick that Morning Light had made before she died and that he'd kept all the years since. I'd carried it for 2 winters waiting until I could do this. I put it down in the coulee and I said what I needed to say to him, in Lakota, quietly, and I said his name, and I stood there a while longer. Then Clara put her hand on my arm. Not a word. Just her hand, just above my elbow, the pressure of it steady. I put my hand over hers. We stood like that until I was ready to go. On the ride back, she told me something she hadn't told me before. She said that the night before the hail came, the night before the 3 cows died and she made her decision, she'd been sitting in the ranch house alone and Dallin had been in town, and she'd thought about whether there was a reason to keep going. She said it plain, without drama, the same way she said everything. She said she'd sat there for a long time and she hadn't been able to think of one. And then the hail came, and in the morning there were 3 dead cows and she'd stood in the field looking at them and something in her had said, no, not like this. Not ending in this field with this man, and she'd saddled the mare and she'd walked out. She said, I don't know what made the difference. I don't know why that morning and not some other morning. I said, maybe it doesn't matter why. Maybe what matters is that you went. She said, maybe. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, I keep thinking if I'd had someone to talk to during all of it, if there'd been one person who knew what was happening and just sat with me. I said, you have that now. She looked at me. We were riding side by side, close enough that the horses were nearly touching. She said, yes, I do. She didn't look away, and I didn't look away. And we rode on through the gold October grass with the bighorns going purple in the west, and the sky coming down dark and clear. And it was the first time in a long time that I felt the weight I'd been carrying become, if not lighter exactly, then at least shared. Distributed between 2 people instead of pressed down onto one. That's a different thing than putting a weight down. It doesn't go away. But you can walk with it differently when someone else has their hand on it. She wintered with us that year in the camp on the Powder River. There were things she had to learn and things she had to unlearn, and she did both without complaining. She worked hard. She was useful. She became, in time, a known quantity in the band, trusted by people who don't trust easily, which is about the best thing you can say about a person in a place where trust is the coin of survival. And she and I, we built a thing together, slowly, the way you build a thing when neither of you is in a hurry and neither of you has anything to prove. I want to be straight about what I mean. I mean that we were honest with each other, and we were careful with each other, and we sat beside each other in the dark a lot of nights and said what was true instead of what was easy. And in the spring, when it was warm enough to be outside without a coat, she came and found me by the creek one evening and she said, plain as always, "I'm not going east." I said, "I know." She said, "I thought I should say it out loud, so it's settled." I said, "It's settled." She stood there a moment. Then she took my hand and held it, and we stood by the creek in the late light with the water running cold and quick, and the willows coming into leaf, and neither of us said anything else because there was nothing else to say. I want to tell you what she gave me, because I'm not sure I understood it at the time, and I understand it better now. She didn't rescue me from anything exactly. That's not quite right. She didn't swoop in and fix what was broken. She did something harder than that and simpler than that. She saw me. Not the chief. Not the thing I was carrying. She saw the man underneath it, the tired, ordinary man who had been hauling a weight for 19 years and hadn't known he was allowed to put any of it down, and she said, "There's nobody here but me," and she meant it, and she kept meaning it every day after that. I'd spent 2 years after my son died convinced that being needed was all I had left, that the purpose was the point, that if I was the one who held things together then at least there was a function to fill. And there is truth in that. There is dignity in being needed, in being the one who does the thing, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But she showed me something else. She showed me that being needed and being known are not the same thing, and that a man can be needed by 100 people and still be alone in the way that matters, and that what she was offering me, being seen, being sat with, being told the truth, and having someone sit still while you told yours, that was not a small thing. That was everything I had been missing without knowing I was missing it. She gave me that. And what I gave her the first place since Ohio where nobody was going to put the fear of the weather or the money or anything else onto her back. I gave her ground that was safe. I gave her work that was real, and people who were fair, and a man who looked at her like she was worth looking at, which I understand now she had not had in a long time. We gave each other those things, freely. The last thing I'll tell you is this. There was a morning in that second winter, a February morning, cold enough that the air had a bite to it even inside the lodge, and I woke up early before the light, and Clara was still asleep beside me, her face turned toward me, and outside the wind was moving through the camp and I could hear the horses in their shelter, and the sound of the river running low under the ice somewhere to the south. And I lay there in the dark and I thought about my wife, Morning Light. I thought about my son. I thought about the 20 years of carrying that had brought me to this place on this morning. And then I looked at the woman sleeping beside me, this woman from Ohio who'd walked out of a ruined ranch with a lame horse and a near-empty bag and had turned out to have more in her than most men I'd known, and I thought, I'm not the same man I was 2 years ago. I am still tired. I still carry what I carry, but I carry it differently. I carry it with someone who sees me doing it. That is not a small thing. That is the whole of it.